Here is our primary in our S1 replica set, running rs.status on it, and we get back our document describing the status of the replica set as this node sees it. You can see it's got various different members, various sort of different things here, but the piece that we're actually interested in is the syncing to field. So the primary, by the way, is this node here, EC2 54.234.192.205, and as you can see that the secondary in this set is syncing from it, which makes sense. We've only got a primary, and a secondary, and an arbiter in this set currently, so it has to be syncing from the primary. This is your field here. So if we had another secondary in this set, this might actually be a secondary, and we could alter the sync from source. To do that without breaking down this or adding in another secondary, we're going to have to switch to something with a bit of a better layout for this purpose. So because our test replica sets in our test charts we've been using up until now are somewhat unsuitable for this quick example, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and we're going to set up a test replica set rather quickly. We're going to do that. First of all, we're going to start a shell using the --nodb parameter. That just gives us literally a shell that isn't connected to anything. We're going to run 3 lines of commands. The first one will be this one. We assign to a variable new repl set test is an internal command. You may need to run MongoDB with enable test commands to be able to use this, but that's not the case with the build I'm using. In any case, it does just work out of the box, as it were. So for our RST will be our variable new repl set test, and we're just going to call it test set, and we're going to give it 3 nodes. Now I'm going to just show you the 2 commands that we're going to run after that, because once I actually run these, they'll start to be a series of logging. Because when you run these test commands, the logging is just going to print a standard out. That's going to scroll down the screen. It's going to be a little bit hard to follow. So we're going to run rst.startSet, which will literally boot up the 3 nodes with the relevant configuration options for the MongoDs. And then we're going to run rst.initiate, and that just initiates the set. You'll get a primary, you'll get an rs.config being created, and the various other sort of bootstrapping you need to have a healthy primary, secondary replica set. So let's actually run those. As you can see, a lot of stuff scrolls by. Get a handy little information message saying that it's starting up. You'll see there's a secondary, there's a node in startup 2. A few election messages. The key to what's actually communicating here is this key on the left, which is being added in on the logging. M31001, M31000, M31002. Those are just the ports that the replica set is actually running on this one machine. So I think, yes, I think that should be it. We should now have a perfectly valid replica set, and it picks those ports as part of they're built in 30,000, 30,001, 30,002, so there's no need to choose those. That will be done automatically. 1 second. Sorry, it was 31,000. So 31,000 is the primary. As you can see, there's actually a warning here that the soft limits are too low. This is running on a Mac, and the limits, I believe, are something around the order of 256 by default on a Mac. So you're going to get the ulimit warning message here, but we don't really care about that in a test setup. We're just going to be using this to sort of illustrate the chaining command. So let's look at rs.status here. And here we have the primary, so that's not syncing to anybody. Naturally, it is the primary, so this is going to be the one node that isn't syncing to anything else. We've got 2 secondaries this time, and you can see that the first one, which is running on port 31001, is syncing to the primary, and the second one is also syncing to the primary. So both syncing off the primary, no chaining going on here. What we're going to do is we're going to change 31002 here to sync from 31,001. So we're going to create sort of the smallest chain you can here, but just for illustrative purposes. So we log out of this. You log into 31,002. We're going to use the helper rs.syncFrom here to change its sync source. Just to show you what that is, it's just a wrapper for running the admin command repl set sync from, and then the actual host that you want to sync from in that case. We're just going to cheat another little bit here and get the full name of the secondary we're going to switch over to. So let's get that. So we've run the rs.syncFrom command, and we've asked it to switch over to sync from the other secondary in the set rather than the primary. So you can see the command has returned successfully. We've got an OK1 here. It tells you what the previous sync target was, which was the primary, which was running on port 31,000. And we've requested that it switch over to 31,001. If you run rs.status, you can see that the although it's an error message, it's not really an error message, it's more of an informational message, but it goes into the error message bucket. You can see that it's now syncing to the secondary by request. So you can even see that this has actually been changed. Just to prove that this is the case when we look at the primary. So we've run this again. The primary looks the same, the other secondary looks exactly the same, still syncing from the primary on port 31000. When we go to the one that we've actually made some changes to, see that this is now syncing to education.local 31001, which is our other secondary right here. And that's how you control chaining. There is one final option that we're going to cover. For that, we're going to go back to our documentation. This is the configuration documentation that we referred to earlier, and you can see if we scroll down, there's actually a series of settings at the replica set level. So this would be at the member level. These are the ones that we were covering previously, hidden, priority, etc. But you can see that there are settings for the replica set itself. We're going to skip over to get last error modes and get last error defaults. That's not relevant to this piece of the course, but the one that is relevant is chaining allowed. And this is a boolean. So by default, chaining allowed is true, and as a result it doesn't actually show up in RSet status, but let's actually change that. Let's go back onto our primary that we're using to change the sync sources. And what we're going to do here is we're going to store the config in a variable again. So cfg equals rs.conf. So now the current config is saved in that cfg variable. And the thing that you'll notice here is that the settings document that is referred to in the documentation here, this sort of settings subdocument, is not there. So because we haven't set any of them, it doesn't actually exist. So what we're going to do is create that. So the reason I got this first error is because the settings subdocument actually doesn't exist, so we're just creating that with an empty document first. Then we should be able to set config the settings of chaining allowed equal to false. There we go. So now if we look at our CFG variable in whole, we'll see that we now have a settings subdocument, and we have a chaining allowed false setting in there. So but this is only in our local variable that we defined here. We haven't actually made this change yet. Well, for that we need to do a reconfig. So let's do that. So we call the reconfig method on replica set, use the reconfig helper, and we pass in the new configuration object that contains this settings subdocument chaining allowed false. There we go. When you do a reconfig, all of the current connections are dropped, which is why you see this init call failed. That's the current connection from the shell being dropped, and then it reconnects. Reconnect is okay, and then we're still on the primary. So now let's just do a quick rs.conf, and we'll see the chaining allowed is set to false. Now that will be for any subsequent chaining decisions for this replica set. As you might recall, we manually set the sync source for this particular secondary to the other secondary, not the primary. So that will stay that way until it has to make another decision about chaining. So in other words, if this secondary went down, it would have to make another decision if something else happened here, or if you restarted this MongoDB process and had it rejoin the set, then it would see that chaining was disallowed and switch over. Obviously, the other thing you could do at the moment is, now that you've disabled it on a replica set wide basis, you could just switch this back to the primary manually, and you'll know from then on it will always sync from the primary. So that's replica set chaining and how to disable it, if you so wish. With the obvious drawback being, you can imagine if you have this distributed set that we had earlier on, if every single one of these is going to be syncing from the primary, disable chaining across the whole set, that would mean that everything will now sync from the primary only. So that's going to be a significant increase in the amount of load and the amount of getmores that the primary is doing. Then again, they are just read, so there's a distinct possibility that your primary might be easily able to keep up with that. It still may not be the best implementation for you. If you are having issues with load on the primary, you might want to re-implement chaining and deal with the increased latency and the eventual consistency issues that we discussed earlier.